Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Bigfoot Notes from the Field. I'm your host, William Jevning. This week, we're going to discuss a topic that sort of came from comments on the podcasts that I have placed on my YouTube channel and from some other sources. And Don, my guest last week, had forgotten a couple details he wanted to talk about. So we're going to talk about what witnesses see during an encounter with a Sasquatch. So what we have this week is sort of something rare in terms of we have 4 witnesses on the panel this evening, and our scientist KD. We have Jeremiah, we have TW, myself, and Don Gummo, who have all seen Sasquatches at least once. Fellows, welcome to this week's show.
Hey guys.
How's it going?
Hey guys, how are you?
So what I think we'll do is we'll start with you, Don, since you wanted to sort of finish off what you were talking about and the details you left out of last week's interview. So you want to go ahead and tell us what you were thinking about there?
Okay, sure. It was actually most of my interview is the 2 black circles that I was focusing on, which ended up being his eyes. At first, I just didn't know what they were. And to me, I saw 2 black circles, a little bit bigger than hockey pucks, fairly close together, just sitting in the air in the woodline. And it looked to me like there was fur or like feathers or some texture almost all the way around them, but they were perfect circles. And since then, I've been looking at now every picture I look at brow ridges to try to find that perfect circle. And a recent issue of National Geographic that just came out had some orangutans in it. And there is a good picture in there, pretty close to what I saw. The only difference was the eyeballs of the orangutan were 2 or 3 times the size of what I saw. And but what I want to talk about is the focusing on the eyes. I didn't get to see much else of the side of the head. I could see from about the middle of the forehead to just above the nostrils, probably. But it wasn't until later on, after I talked to you, Will, that you had mentioned it could be skin. And it wasn't 3 or 4 hours later that it really came to light. I know what you meant. It was skin that I was looking at. It was just the reflection of the foliage right in front of him, reflecting off his brows, which highlighted them, and they were wrinkled, which gave them texture. And then it all made sense. But it was pretty amazing how that is all that I focused on. I mean, I couldn't take my eyes off of his eyes.
And you know, it made me think about that when you mentioned that. We were texting back and forth, and you actually had done a sketch and sent me. And I sent you the picture that I took about 10 years ago in Northern California. I didn't know anything was in the picture. When I went and looked a couple of weeks later, zooming in, you know, lo and behold, here is what appears to be the majority of what looks like a face. Now, the sun is coming directly from above, so you get a lot of heavy shadow, but there's certainly what looks like a forehead, 2 big eye sockets that are black, you know, cheekbones and such. I mean, you guys have all seen the picture. Isn't that what it looks like to you?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I'll post that on our Facebook page so listeners can take a look and see what that is. I'm not saying it is a Sasquatch, but it's pretty unusual. I mean, I don't know what else it is. It was in a place where there was a lot of Bigfoot activity that we've had year after year. You know, so I leave it open for people to judge for themselves what it may or may not be. But what you described with the eyes was very similar to what you see in that picture.
It's very similar. The size of the circles and the spacing of the circles is very similar. You know, they weren't that far apart. They were kind of close together, and they were almost a complete, I think they were, what I was seeing was a complete, like 2 big hockey pucks sitting out there. I thought I was seeing a complete circle. And like I said, since then, there's a picture of your picture of the Minnesota Iceman. He has very circular brow ridge, and I noticed that too. And that's what I was seeing, with that complete circle. You know, there wasn't a break.
Go ahead, Don.
I was going to say I couldn't see. I don't remember seeing where the circle stopped at the nose. It almost seemed like just two complete circles there. You know, I didn't recognize a nose.
Right. Let me ask TW. Now, TW, you had a close encounter with one. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, when I got up to the face, everything was so quick because as soon as I shined, that tack light in his face, I thoroughly pissed him off, and he threw that chunk of firewood at me. But I distinctly remember at one point I could see these big circles. But, I had to refer to M.K. Davis of what the work he's been doing on the Patterson-Gimlin film. And when he actually come out with it was the actual picture of Patty enhanced. And then he had an artist go do a rendition on it. And that was what I pretty much saw. And that's what I could remember.
Right. So it sounds very similar to what was in the picture I took, and I would say for my own sighting, but my own sighting was the light wasn't good, so I could see the eyes were large, but I couldn't make out that kind of detail like what Don described.
Well, yeah, you got to remember, 3 in the morning or 1 in the morning when I got called out to that place. So,
right, very true.
Yeah, there wasn't.
Jeremiah, how about you? I mean,
yeah, it like you guys were saying, very similar, but then again, like TW was saying, nighttime, the female, and if this makes any sense, you're talking about the round eyes, with the hockey puck like shapes around, like Don was saying, the circles. Now, what I saw in that female when she looked at me, I don't want to say it looked like two distinct circles. It was almost like more of an open space. Do you know what I mean? Almost like, where her nose, the space where her nose, where her forehead, where the brow ridge was to the tip of the nose, right through the eye line, the eye, where the eyes were. It was almost like an open space as opposed to two separate circles. Do you know what I mean? And as opposed to two separate circles, the eyes were shaped differently, more kind of like a human's eyes. You know what I mean? Like an oval, like an oval shape.
I wonder if, I wonder if the variation is maybe skin tone.
Could be.
Might be.
Could be.
What I've noticed in most sketches that I've seen, like I'm really looking at brows now, ever since I saw that, most of them sketches have a straight brow. And that's not what I saw.
Well,
I definitely saw that circular brow.
See, and that's what I saw, Don, what you just mentioned about the straight brow. That's more what I saw is more of a straighter brow. As opposed to the circular.
How about you, TW? How'd yours look?
Well, that was it had a pronounced brow ridge. I could tell that much. And there wasn't any hair in that area. It was, the skin was almost brown in color.
Yeah.
What I could remember. And I'm not so sure that ain't just probably skin, just the pores just impacted with dirt, giving it that hinky hue color. But, the brow ridge is pretty pronounced. Not to the degree that what we've learned through schooling, like a Neanderthal type brow ridge, but it was definitely not as pronounced as a chimp, but it was pronounced. You could tell. You could tell that there was eye sockets in that area.
Yeah, and there was no and that, I guess that more describes what I was trying to say. There was no hair in that area whatsoever. In the eye sockets, none whatsoever. So as opposed to two circular, spots.
Yeah, I'd have to say the ones I saw, I couldn't really make out hair in that part of the face. It sort of looked like it came up below that.
Right.
Almost to the high cheek point.
But,
right.
Yeah, right. Right.
See, that's what I saw. The brow ridge I saw continued around the eye to the cheeks. That's where I saw it pronounced.
Right.
It wasn't flat pronounced,
Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's
Katie, what are your thoughts? I mean, he's been kind of quiet here, listening to all these details. But what are your thoughts on what we're all
Well,
saying?
I think it's kind of interesting because so according to scientific theory, in evolutionary standards, the brow ridge was one of the last things that were lost, one of the last features that were lost, on the path to a modern human, and that was as the frontal lobe began to develop in the brain. And I guess, the brow ridge functions to, it supports bones in the face, weaker bones. So, I've never, had an experience with one of these things. So, but I tend to believe that these are obviously flesh and blood creatures and probably some kind of relic hominin, Mm-hmm. Now, I would say that I think it's interesting not to say, there could be different species and whatnot. I know a lot of people say, how intelligent these things are. And I've often said they have to be, although you look at like a wolf and when you're in its domain, it seems a lot more intelligent than you are, obviously. It's just good at what it does and it's master of its domain. But if you follow the scientific theory that the pronounced brow ridge was lost as the frontal lobe developed, which is a lot of cognitive function and personality, and thought processes. I don't know exactly how that fits in. Does it tell us that they're not as problem solving as we might think?
Well, that would be my impression, based on that was, and it would kind of make sense that maybe they're not, of course, as sophisticated as we are,
obviously. Yeah. So, but I think it's interesting.
Well, but the frontal lobe probably has a lot more to do with other things than just cognitive process and problems.
Yeah. Sexuality. Your personality.
Careful there, Jeremiah.
Well, what's interesting, though, is as the four of us talked about those particular details of our own individual encounters, I heard a lot of similarities. Yes. And I think geographically, of course, we're talking all over the country. The Northeast, the Southwest, the Northwest, and all of those fit within a pretty tight set of particulars. So I guess let's go from there now. I know, this is something you can look at gorillas, but we talk about, and let's just go ahead, we can talk about from the top of the head and work our way down. The conical head shape that we see in the Patterson film. Now, I can tell you that all three of the Sasquatches that I've seen all had that feature. But that doesn't mean that everyone sees it.
But I think that genetics has to play with that, though. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get some variation within a species, and for whatever reason, I don't know. I mean, the function mainly of a conical head is that bony ridge that goes across the top of the skull is an attachment for the heavy jaw muscles.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean if it's not there that they still don't have that, and they're still not, in that species. That's just a variation.
Yeah, no, but in talking about a heavy eyebrow, brow ridge. I go to school with a kid. I swear to God, his dad is Krog, because that joker sticks out there a while, and I told him, don't ever shot to the eyeball because they'll crush your eye socket, dude.
It's funny, but you're right. You can look at, and Chris, I'm sure you can comment on this also. But you can look at some people, and all joking aside, you can look at them, and you could swear that they were from a different point in evolution. I mean,
sure.
Yeah, we're not all.
No, but
sure.
Realistically, like. You look at different, like the great apes, as we were just saying, gorillas, chimpanzees, they all have different types of brow ridges. I mean, and to go on what you were just saying with the conical head, Will, I mean, and I know I've told you from the beginning, that's what I've seen. What I've seen in my encounters was an ape. what I've seen, in my opinion. It looked like to me.
Well, now TW and Don, is that what you guys saw?
That's what I would say was a ape orangutan cross. He was pure black. There was no hair. I mean, I saw a reflection on his brows and everything. I couldn't. Fortunately, I only could focus on the eyes. I couldn't move. I just stared at his eyes for 20, 30 seconds. But he looked definitely like an ape.
Yeah.
Ape orangutan cross.
Orangutan, yeah.
No, mine was
Pure black eyes too.
yeah, no, mine was a little more human looking.
Okay.
And I distinctly remember looking at, for some reason this sticks out in my mind more than anything. It was the teeth, very blocky teeth. Now the
Right, which is what we know about the
Like-
Type 1, that very blocky, squared type.
well, and
teeth.
my younger brother, I told you about his encounter, and he described 4-inch long canines.
Oh, wow.
I don't
Right, which is what we know about the Type 2s. See, that's something people need to understand. There are two distinct types, and the teeth are a big identifier. When we see the blocky square teeth, that's the first grouping, and the pronounced canines are the other grouping.
Right.
Which now I don't know, Katie. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not in the first major three types. There's not really a great deal of difference except those teeth, and I don't know how we really explain that unless it has to do with the breeding population or what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, certain dentition is passed through genetics, but just because you have poor dentition doesn't necessarily mean that your offspring will. I guess for me, when I look at it, when people describe the teeth, the way my mind goes to is, was it showing you its teeth? I mean, was it growling? So I know that, pursed lips are common. You see in great apes. And obviously with that, the mouth is closed. I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me, the pronounced canines, and you hear it over and over. It's hard for me to place that. I picture more of a baboon when people are telling me that.
I guess we probably should have Mark on sometime to bring
Yeah.
that up. Our anthropologist,
Sure.
because he'd know more about the details of primate
Right.
and the dentition and that
Right.
sort of thing.
I mean, and whether you're talking about primates or a dog, I mean, genetics are genetics. Things are passed the same way. That all depends on diet and just kind of your environmental niche. What you're feeding on, what traits you would need to be successful within that niche. I mean, as far as the genetics go, that's going to pass it down. My question would be, could the 4 species interbreed, or are they, removed enough? Could it be like a donkey and a horse, giving you a mule, something sterile? So could these of
Squatch.
What's that?
That'd make a pissed off Squatch.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I had a. Well, go ahead, Katie, and then I want to ask.
Yeah.
something.
Just to wrap it up, that's when people say, the pronounced canine or whatnot, or they describe this like dogman-like creature. My mind kind of goes to, well, could it be from the interbreeding of two different species of these things, and where they seem to be more rare? I don't know. It's hard for me to
maybe it's
sign
sort of
on to that.
Maybe it's sort of an aberration,
Sure.
That's and it could even be like some sort of a genetic defect, or I don't want to say disease, but that produces these kind of weird.
Sure, it could be a
offspring.
relic trait.
Like, mutation, would that be the right word?
Well,
Sure.
but it's funny that you.
It could be,
Right.
sure.
Yeah, like a trait, right?
Right.
Well, it's funny that Will mentions is that because there's a going to the genetics of equine. There's a horse out there by the name of Impressive. He's dead now, but he produced several thousand offspring that all had the same genetic flaw.
Makeup.
It was a
Yeah.
syndrome that was called HYPP. And if they're a double negative, then you didn't have to worry about any of the genetic issues. But
Right.
if it was a positive or a positive negative,
Mhm.
well, then you started to see some genetic issues. Well, bring on the more recent lineage of a horse by the name of Poco Bueno. I actually ended up having to train one of those horses, and I threw a saddle on this poor horse's back.
Yeah.
After I got done working this horse, and I didn't even step in the saddle. I was doing a lot of groundwork. Well, when I pulled the saddle off, the next day, all that skin where the saddle outline was sloughed off.
Oh no.
And then
Oh,
we
boy.
found out that because of the line breeding, that there was a genetic flaw with the Poco Bueno lines.
Sure.
So,
Well, it's interesting because, you look at like an elk, and elk actually have these ivory eye teeth, there's a lot of jewelry and stuff that's made out of them. And every once in a while, you'll have an elk that has essentially kind of a sharp canine, and they say that's a remnant of tusks, and you actually see that every once in a while in deer.
you see that
yeah,
in deer
you do.
in Southeast Asia.
Musk
right.
deer.
Yeah, exactly.
They're called musk deer. Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So that can be definitely, explained through genetics. And I have a very open mind. I'm not going to claim to, be an expert on anything. It's hard for me to sign on to like the dog man just because I couldn't explain how a dog, is going to go upright, but now not to say, you couldn't train a dog to hop around, but, I would more sign on, to the fact that, okay, this is actually a Sasquatch that is carrying one of these relic traits, and perhaps it might be prevalent. And like you're saying, it could be a recessive trait that, whatever, 25% or, 1 in every 4 offspring is gonna have it in, if there's 2 recessive carriers. So yeah. That's kind of my take.
Sorry, go ahead, TW.
Well, we needed No Boots Billy to explain that one because he's in that country where they song about it.
No shoes, whatever.
TW, when you mentioned your brother sighting, I was curious to hear about that. Can you tell us? I mean, and what was? How do you notice the teeth? Was it bearing its teeth at him?
Here's the thing. My brother used to be stationed at Fort Lewis. And him and his buddy got the last weekend of elk season going. This is back in the mid '90s. So they go up. I think they went up to Mount Rainier, and they went camping. Set up their camp. Went and scouted out what locations they wanted to hunt. And when they got back, the camp was pretty well destroyed. And they were thinking, well, crap, it was a bear come in there, and it was late in the season, so it's probably looking for a quick meal before it goes hibernation. So they go into town, they get something to eat, and they come back, and they're both sleeping in the back of my brother's pickup that had a camper shell on it. Well, he said about 4 in the morning, he woke up, and he could hear some growling. And he used to keep an angle head flashlight in the crook of his neck. My dad did the same thing in Vietnam. Yeah. Well, he started flashing it around, and all of a sudden he seen this human face in the window looking at him on his side of the truck. And I used to kid him about having a Desert Eagle 44 Magnum.
It's overkill.
He's fumbling around looking for this pistol to put the magazine in it. And about that time, that's when that thing bared its teeth at him and collapsed that side of Tyler's camper shell on his truck. And to this day, he rarely talks about it, but I got pictures of it someplace he sent. So I have to go through my old emails and see if I can pull those pictures up. But you'd almost swear that, because you can see 2 distinct imprints, and that whole side of that camper shell just collapsed like an accordion.
Wow.
Well, and that bearing the teeth, that's, of course, a challenge. So I would say it was a little bit more than a challenge in that particular case because it went beyond just the challenge. It actually smashed.
Well, and he was, his buddy that was with him was saying, thank God he didn't decide to pull up because it had pulled that camper shell right up.
My gosh.
Oh, Lord. Well, in terms of, I guess, physical characteristics, I'm going to put it to you guys. Are there any things that stick out in your mind, especially things that we see on Facebook and elsewhere, people talking about that maybe are inconsistencies compared to what you all and myself have seen, or whatever direction you guys think we should go with this?
Go
ahead.
I've seen, and I've told you, I've shared this with all of you guys actually. I don't know about you guys, but what I've seen, it didn't have the typical bodybuilder look with the small waist. And I know I've told you this several times, Bill.
Yeah.
It was straight down.
Yeah, mine didn't either.
Heavy. That's right.
Straight.
That heavy buttocks hip area.
What I saw looked like a
That's
couple
right.
of logs.
The heavy.
Yeah,
That's right.
There wasn't a lot of deviation. It was kind of straight.
Absolutely straight, heavy quadricep area, hips, pelvic region. That's what impressed me, to be honest with you.
Well, the broadness of the shoulders is what surprised me. How broad their shoulders are.
Right. What I'm
How
talking
big
about
they are.
though is like
Right.
how when people get talking about their encounters with the contrast from the broadness to all of a sudden sleeking down to a very tiny waist.
No, no. It was
Right.
It was like continuously on both sides, all the way down to the.
And that's what I,
Yeah, like a
Right.
big stump.
that's
you
what
know?
I saw too. That's exactly what I saw.
And not
TW.
even a pot belly, just
That's
solid.
right. And that's
Just
exactly
straight.
what I've seen.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, well, yeah, that's as far as
Don, what do you think on yours?
Well, unfortunately, I only got to see the eyes. That's all I really got.
Okay.
Eyes were
got to
broad.
see him.
Eyes were broad.
Yeah, I mean, I saw just enough, and I'm telling you, he was gone so quick. When I ran up there afterwards, there was no chance of seeing anything afterwards. It was unbelievable how quick he got out of there.
And you guys can also tell. I mean, of course, you look at the Patterson film. That's like a log.
Yeah.
There's nothing really pronounced. It's just a big chunk. And even the picture I have from Michigan that I'm going to put in my next book looks the same. It's massive. It doesn't taper down. It's just this big creature.
Very big.
Right.
especially from that angle. That pictures that too with those calves.
Yeah, the huge left calf on that leg there. I know.
Unbelievable.
You know,
That's some big muscle.
Unbelievable. And I
that
think
picture.
Yeah.
a lot of the times what's impressive about these things too is the width. Yes, very impressive, width wise, but back to front also. The depth.
The depth. Yeah, I've told people many times that the first one I saw, then of course the second one that came by, it was smaller, and then the second sighting I had, the third individual, was bigger than both of those two. But it's not an exaggeration to say from the front of the chest to the back where the spine is that you're talking a thickness
3
of 3 feet.
Yeah. Yep. At least.
yeah, that's huge. It's massive.
You can't put it into words, how big these things are. It's hard. It's hard to explain, to describe to somebody how immense these things,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger in a ghillie suit. It's these are just a massive chunk of animal.
yeah, just an immense.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. His eyes, I know that because he was next to a tree right in front of me. Afterwards, I went out there and I held up a piece of cardboard and I tried to recreate what I saw, and his eyes were about 8 inches apart, 7.5 to 8 inches apart.
Yeah.
So his head, I knew it.
An interesting feature.
What I was seeing was just those circles were just so big, it stood right out to me when I stepped outside. As soon as I opened my door, I saw 2 big black circles,
One interesting feature that you don't hear talked about a lot are hands. And I interviewed a gentleman last week, and it was interesting because where his sighting took place happened in the same place where, and I've wrote about what I call the Clark Ranch incident back in 1976, where the 4 of us were out there and had these things surround us for almost a whole night. So it was in the same place during the same time frame. And he said when he saw this thing, it reached his hand up and put it against a tree. Well, he went back, him and his friend went back the next day, and they kind of took stock of how far, from the heel of the hand to where the fingers left off, and it ended up being a good foot and a half long.
Wow.
Jeez.
And that's a very interesting thing. The hands are elongated; they're not proportionally like ours. The midsection of the palm area is actually longer, and I think the forefingers
Right.
are a little stubbier, and they don't really have an opposable thumb, which in an ape species you would expect.
Contrary to popular belief. Yeah.
Right.
They're actually more.
Right.
And Katie, I think you probably know this. Isn't there for us to be able to use an opposable thumb? That's a specialized part of our brain.
Oh
isn't
yeah,
that correct?
absolutely.
So it's not like just any ape could have an opposable thumb. It had to be developed.
Oh sure.
In
Sure.
the brain.
And I mean, the great apes, their hand is designed for, climbing, and, ours is for gripping and for fine motor skills, I know that palm print that you have, I think is pretty staggering when you look at the picture next to the human hand. And I find it.
I've actually got a. Oh, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead.
you can.
I was just going to say I've got a couple of actual prints that were sent to me. One of our people in Indiana sent it, and actually, it was. And you talk about. I know TW was talking about his brother in the truck. This handprint, and again, these pictures are going to go in the new book. Was on the driver's window. He slept in his truck. I can't remember if he was out hunting or what he was doing, but this handprint was in the middle of the window, the glass. I think we lost TW. It was in the middle of the window. Yeah. His brother was a CSI for a major city and actually processed the print. They were getting ready to lift it. Thank God they photographed it. And then it rained, of course, the print was destroyed. Let me see if I think,
one interesting trait
TW
that I've keyed in on a couple witnesses, and I guess we're going to know if all of a sudden a bunch of witnesses start saying they see this, but, it's when it's walking, how it's like the wrist is rolled back and how the fingers are curled in a sense.
Chris, you and I have talked about that, Chris.
Right.
We have, exactly.
The knuckles facing forward.
Yep.
Right.
And I find that really interesting. And it's funny. I've caught a couple encounters where the people are saying that. And to me, that's a detail that unless somebody's out there scouring tons of, Bigfoot interviews, which there are people who are going to do that, but that's just not something that you pick out to say,
If I have a witness say that to me, generally, most of the time they're telling me the truth.
Right. Yeah, that's very.
I do.
Right. And I know
That's a good point, Chris.
And it's one of those things where I know that everybody, tends to focus on one area for whatever reason. And so there's another part of me when somebody gives too many details where I'm like, dude, you had that much time to look at everything.
Well, you don't.
Well, and that's a good point,
that's
because
the thing, yeah.
when you listen to what Don said, what TW said, what Jeremiah said, what I've said, you kind of focus on a particular. Because I don't know if your brain doesn't allow you to go into more detail, because let me tell you, folks out there, there's a great deal of fear when it comes to these creatures. When you have one of these encounters, I mean, when I say it's an underwear changing moment, I mean, you want to crap yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think, and that's another. There's always a problem with eyewitness testimony, because this has been driven into the ground. But obviously, the same witnesses to the same event are all going to have different details and different accounts. And so, there's certain things that I wonder, okay, is that like recall error? Are you adding, bias into your recall, which is natural? I'm not saying people are doing that on purpose. It happens.
Oh, well, it's a frame of reference.
Exactly.
Right, it's a frame of reference. It's what
Right.
you're going to fall back on.
Exactly. And so there are, the certain things, again, that stand out to me. But, and then again, I guess just to come full circle with this, there are other times where, to me, it's more believable to somebody who's like, you know what, honestly, it was a black mass and I was so scared. All I saw was the size, again, as to somebody who has too many details. Are you losing people now, Will? What's going on?
No, Jeremiah went out and his dog was barking.
Sorry, guys.
One other thing that we could talk about is on my recordings, I'm getting a lot of clicking. I get some popping, but I'm getting a lot of click more snapping, I guess, with the mouth.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, the teeth chatter. No, let me ask you, Don. Are you leaving your device just out in the area, or what? Out in the woods, or what?
Yeah, it's right behind my house. Yeah, there's a road that goes up in the back. I just put it right in the road.
Yeah.
Facing up. Yeah, I put it inside something. Well, not just I put something to cover it, and I faced the microphone upward.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I mean the tooth chatter. I mean that could be from excitement. Are you having other sounds? Does the popping does the popping precede vocals?
I'm not getting too many vocals. Mostly popping. I'm getting lots of pops, lots of sneezes. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but
sure.
But a lot of clicking. I don't know. It just sounds like clicking.
Don, does it
Please
sound
leave a
like
brief message, name, phone number, and time when you can contact
I
back.
think we lost.
Leave him
I
a
was trying to
voicemail.
call TW. I don't know if he's. Well, he went to his message. I don't know what he's doing.
Oh, man. One other thing I noticed on when Billy's in town, that we had that recorded, you can hear. I thought I heard the creature walk away and leave, and then about 30 seconds, a minute later, you can hear dogs barking, and then you can hear footsteps coming back. But I don't know why I can hear clicking still going on in my yard. I'm wondering if he's calling someone else from the swamp, because down that way is the swamp. The dog, because you can hear this creature come running right up through the woods. You can hear the footsteps come right up louder. For about 2 seconds, you can hear them.
Does it sound like a dolphin? Like, not all joking aside, like a dolphin clicking?
Close, very close.
Like on sonar? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, very. It's very close to that, but it's not so consistent. It'll change into a pop sometimes.
Yeah, I heard, and I remember talking. I asked you about it one night. Well, Kelly and I were out one night, and we heard something like that. And that's the first time I had ever heard
the pops and clicking.
And it sounded no baloney, guys. It sounded like like we were doing sonar on a group of dolphins, and that's exactly what it sounded like.
Interesting.
If that's what it was, Don, I've heard something extremely similar to that.
And on that recording where I burp and I get a response, you can hear clicking between the pops.
Okay.
It goes on for a few seconds. Yeah, if you listen to it, it's a series of clicks and pops. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if that's almost... Or go ahead, sorry.
No, if you listen to it, even without I put a very low filter on it first, and you can hear it on that one. But when you put a little slightly higher filter on it, it comes in a little bit clearer. Yeah. You can even hear it. You can slightly hear it with no filter on it at all, but it's just too much noise there.
So I wonder if
communication. We'd have to do another whole. We'd have to do another whole show on just the audio.
I'd have to hear that. I'd have to hear that because that could almost be some kind of, nervous mechanism in the creature itself as well. Because I'd have to hear it. I really would need to hear it. But my dog.
I could share it with you on Google.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. I really would. Because that's the
Okay.
thing. My dog, when he gets excited, he'll do this kind of tooth chatter deal, and he just does it on his own. I mean, he's laying on his bed. When I come
Yeah,
into the room, he'll do it. So yeah.
Yeah, bear do that too. They snap their
Oh, yeah.
jaws. You know.
Oh, yeah.
Do it. Yeah.
So what about other physical characteristics, fellas? Anything that stands out?
Okay. As far as you know how we hear a lot of encounters. You hear about the I don't know if this is what you're looking for, Will. You know how we hear a lot about matted fur, matted hair.
Yeah, right.
Well, I can tell you when the encounter I had with that female, that's not what I saw one bit. I saw
Yeah, I would say groomed
absolutely.
versus ungroomed.
I saw a very groomed, clean coat. I don't know if it was maybe a winter. It might sound kind of foolish, but maybe a winter coat.
Well,
I don't
here's
know.
what I can tell you. I know from my two different sightings. The first two, I got a fairly decent look at the hair, and it was kind of matted and dirty. And I wouldn't say matted in terms like it had mud and stuff in it. It was all squished together. It looked to me like it had gone through the brush, which was pretty brushy out there because it had little pieces of twigs and material in there from going through brush. The second one, in 1988 in southern Washington, looked relatively like what you see in a Patterson film, except it was much bigger and it was gray in color, and it wasn't stooped like that when it was much more straight up and down, and I think was a male. It didn't appear to be a female to me. Now, whether it had just come out of the Washougal River, I don't know. I couldn't make that out. We only saw it for a couple of seconds, but it didn't look anything like the first two did in terms of the hair being messed up or anything.
So would that be the difference between like a one in a family group, or a family group would obviously be groomed, I guess. They would clean each other. But then like the Rogues or the Sentries, they wouldn't be cleaned. So maybe they would be the ones that would be more matted.
That's interesting.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Actually, that's good thinking. Good.
And see, all of these things are things that people argue about.
Yeah.
It's
a waste of
and
time.
There really shouldn't be any argument. It's a waste of time because there's going to be different situations. Just individual members of the species do different things. They look a little different. There's just a lot of stuff going on. And for people to call somebody out because, well, what they saw was this way and what that person saw didn't match exactly what they saw.
Well, yeah, and you got to understand that the coat on any animal is an indication to that animal's health. And that has a lot to do with diet, and stuff.
Good point.
So if you had a very healthy,
Sure.
Whether it be a male or a female, natural oils and stuff that are going to keep hair from clumping, and will give it more of a flowing appearance or whatnot, So yeah, no, I would go more towards health. Now,
Yeah.
I think the way that Dawn, not to kind of cut you off there, but how Dawn brings up the grooming. Now that's really interesting because obviously we see primates doing that, and I've heard multiple witnesses tell me that how beautiful its hair was, and so I think that's an interesting thing, and I think that's more of a general observation that can be made in a high stress situation where more than although it may be detailed, I think it's easier to pick up on what the hair looks like than maybe the color of the eyes or the fingernails.
And it could depend on the proximity of the person, the witness to the creature also.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and of course light conditions and weather and all that stuff.
right. But we have heard sightings though where people say that it looks like they've just combed their hair.
Yes.
They look well groomed,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I mean, it would depend on the individual creature, I think, more or less.
Right.
I think with a lot of these things, especially things like hair, that's one of those, there's a lot of variables that come into play. versus, hard physical characteristics like, if somebody says, well, the Sasquatch had a pronounced nose. Well, sorry, that's not
Right.
something that's historically very accurate, because you go back in thousands of reports and they all talk about a flat nose.
Right.
That's what I saw. I'm sure you guys have also.
Yeah.
A big heavy jaw, versus a weak jaw. I've never heard of anybody say a Sasquatch
Well,
had a weak jaw.
No, and it's funny. I had actually heard recently. I don't know how. I tend to listen to whatever kind of encounters that I can get a hold of, and I heard an account of a guy. He seemed very genuine, and I was very intrigued by what he had to say. But he was saying that the mouth almost looked like it was going, from ear to ear almost. It looked like if it opened up its mouth, that it would just be this big gaping hole.
Like pest defender.
I think that's the impression.
Yeah.
Even what I saw, that's one thing I do kind of recall. The mouth wasn't open, but you could see
Right.
where the lips were. And it was much larger proportionally
Right,
than ours
right.
is. And you could tell it had this really massive mouth if
Yeah,
it opened
yeah.
its jaw.
Almost its head would fold in half if it opened its mouth all the way.
That's like what this guy said. Yeah.
like
Like a
right.
Pez dispense. Like a Pez dispenser.
like a Pez,
yeah.
like a Pez.
Right. Right.
No, I
my
mean,
God.
I agree.
I was so intrigued by that, and I've never heard anybody describe it that way.
I mean, I'm sure it's really
Sure.
not that big, but I think
Proportionally.
proportionally, when you're talking about the size
Right,
of the head
right.
of these things, and that's the thing, the head looks smaller when you're looking at these massive
Yeah.
shoulders and
Sure,
how big the
sure.
creature is, and the head sits low. It sits low in the shoulders, and that's another feature. And again, here's one of these things that sort of goes with that. That head sitting down on the shoulders is very similar to what
Yep.
how
Sure.
gorillas are put together. And when they turn, they can turn their heads, but not with the
Right.
range of motion we have. In other words, if they're going to look to their right or left, they're going to have
Torso.
to turn their
Yeah.
upper trunk, which goes sort of in line with when they talk about things like, there's some people that claim they can have a language they can speak, and when you look
Right.
at that feature, it goes
Right.
against that, because, and I can't remember what the physical. There's a physical apparatus with gorillas. One of my anthropology professors years ago explained it. It actually prevents them from being able
Sure,
to form
sure.
words
Well, here's the thing.
because of the position of their
Right,
head and
and
the
well,
shoulders.
here's the thing. Here's a thing also. Will, I remember an interview that you did a while back, and it was from a guy who had an encounter on Yakult Mountain, I believe it was, and I
Right.
remember him saying, and this has always stuck with me. He's the only person I've ever heard say it, but where he said when this thing turned to leave, it was like its torso, shoulders, and torso go first, and then the lower body went. It was like it segmental.
Yeah, that kind of makes
Yeah.
sense. You kind of makes sense. I mean, when you're going to go to move, I think if we think about the way we move, a lot of times we
Sure.
sort of do the same thing. In some,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
some
that was
respects.
just that was crazy to me, and that guy's account again. I go a lot on, and you have to in this field. The feeling you get from the witness, and I got that guy. I believe was very genuine, and I mean, Will, you extensively followed that group. Were they different
Yeah.
than other groups that you studied? I mean, no.
Not typically, no. There's a lot of similarities, and that's one of the things when you start learning a lot from observations in the field. You can take that from one group to the other, and they're pretty similar. I mean,
Sure.
with minor variations. And again, it depends on the lay of the land, what sort of people. A lot of it depends on what kind of human activity is going on in the area, how
Sure.
they conduct themselves, and that's in terms of how careful they are or
Sure.
not so careful. If you're in an area like Jeremiah's where it's pretty remote, they're going to be less
Yeah.
careful in conjunction with people than, let's say, in a place where, like in Southwest Washington, Skamania County, there's quite a few people around there, so they conduct themselves a little bit
Sure,
more cautiously in terms of exposing themselves as opposed to being in a more,
Sure,
wild
sure. And
conditions.
I have to say, this might be a little off topic. I just find it ironic. I think being from the Pacific Northwest, I never gave any or much attention to that upper eastern seaboard other than kind of the whole Whitehall, New York incident.
Most
But I'm
people
telling
don't.
you, yes, this meeting, Dawn and Jeremiah, I obviously look at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is teeming with,
Yeah.
activity. Very interesting.
Even places like Nova Scotia, I've had people. And I had a young man write me a letter years ago about his own encounter there, and it's a place you don't really
Right.
hear anything about. And I've had people email me and ask me, "Are there no Sasquatches there, or is there something you don't hear about?" And for those listening that might be in that region, it's something we don't hear about. They are seeing reports do come from there. And Don, you probably know more about this because that's sort of your
Yeah, there is
neck of the woods.
there is a video on YouTube. I can't think of the name of it, but there's a guy hiking with his dog, and he's following a set of tracks in the mud. And it's definitely
Yeah,
larger.
so it's not that they're not there.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, they're around there. They're around there. It's
Right,
just
well,
that
yeah.
there
that's
are
what I
lots
was
of
gonna.
folks in that.
They
that region.
rely on the ocean just like they do in the Northwest. They for the winters they come down to the ocean, and
Sure.
there's a lot of mussels around here. There's plenty of food along the shore.
Well, and go ahead,
Go ahead.
Jeremiah, sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say. I mean, if you look at where Don and I are at, and it is pretty remote. I mean,
Oh yeah.
in the
It is.
Adirondack Park, you got 6.2 million acres, of nothingness, and where Don's at too. I mean, it's pretty vast.
There's nothing behind me. Yeah,
It's
I can
right.
go 50 miles through the woods behind me.
Well,
Yeah.
isn't there? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was done. Go ahead.
In those Adirondacks in that area, can't you fit like every national park in America in
Hey,
that
yep.
range?
Yep, Yellowstone,
Yeah.
Yosemite, and Glacier National, all in one. Oh,
See, that's amazing. So not all of them, and that was obviously a stretch. But yeah, I remember somebody saying that, and that's staggering. You just don't think of that. You think, look, if you're, a dork from, the Pacific Northwest like me, everything over there is New York City.
New York
You know
City.
what I mean?
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, so
which is
Right.
understandable.
And there's another thing too. I think because there's definitely an increase in sightings going on. But when the settlers came here, they pretty much leveled this country of woods. They took all the trees and they leveled their habitat.
Yep.
And
Sure.
I think that's why it was so easy for them to be caught back then and all that. But then now the woods are coming back, and I've got 300-year-old woods out here.
right.
I think their
right.
habitat's coming back, is what I think.
Well, yeah,
It
and
comes back
actually,
pretty
when you
quick.
cut an area like that, especially timber, you allow a lot more sunlight to reach the ground, and it actually is thicker.
You get a lot of
Right.
leafy
It's,
growth
it
coming
it
back.
actually creates better habitat in a lot of ways.
It makes a lot
yeah, it
more
does.
food for
Right.
animals.
Right. But I mean, I know they say, I don't know if it's not literally true, but they say they cleared this country when we came here.
Sure.
There's only a few trees around that survived that.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point.
Well, I always believe that their habitat was taken away. Most of them either died off or moved to Canada or hid in the swamps where they couldn't
Sure.
cut the wood, or up in the mountains.
Well, I mean, now when you look at logging too, it's like they didn't just go cut
Sure.
everything. You have to look at the scale that they were cutting things. So they had plenty of room to move
Yeah.
around.
Oh yeah. And it's not like you can cut a whole forest at once anyway. I mean.
Right.
I mean, they everybody whined. I know in the Pacific Northwest where Katie
Yeah.
and I are from, and when you looked at that area, it wasn't. They didn't just go in
No.
and wipe everything out. There were large tracts of
Yeah.
timber. They would select
Right,
cut.
right.
Even back in the old days, they selected.
absolutely.
But if you look at the Midwest, pictures of the Midwest, there's no trees. Everything was like, you look at old pictures around, even the Northeast around here, there was no
Yeah.
trees. Everything was gone. There was just young trees were coming in. There was no
Sure.
old trees.
Sure.
There's a lot of that country that they're filtering
Yeah.
back in.
Yeah, right. That's what I believe is going. It's definitely going on. I mean, I've seen on YouTube these other animals that people are catching, that smaller animals that nobody knows what they are.
Yeah,
You know, I just
right.
Yeah,
there's
right.
more that lives out there at night than we know. You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at like a mountain lion. I mean, I swear, now again, Will and I come from the Pacific Northwest. They're everywhere. You don't see them; they certainly see you.
You don't.
You
see
got
it.
a ton of them out here now again. Out here though, and
yeah,
it's crazy.
yeah,
Ton of
and
them.
that's the point I was making. It's that they're not supposed to be in all these places, but all over the Midwest, yeah, they're there.
But there
I mean,
they
I
are.
saw one in Michigan with my son and my neighbor, 5 or 6 years ago, and when I talked to the fish and game officer, I asked him, well, hey, can I shoot it next time I see it on my property? And he's like, no, you can't. And I said, well, if they're not here, how come I can't shoot it?
Exactly.
And yeah, he's like, well, what's that tell you? I'm like, okay, well said there, buddy. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, they-
this goes back to what you were just saying about, how they didn't cut everything, and how they had plenty of places to run. I just meant how we have a ton of cougars out here again, but you ask any of the old timers and they'll tell you that they never left to begin with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
They never left. They've always been here. They went up and they hit up. So yeah,
With a higher census. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, there's plenty of cats around here. I mean, I know for a fact Southeast Massachusetts has 4 big cats that roam there. My brother-in-law's dad had a bunch of wild cats for pets, so he was called whenever there were sightings, and he would measure the track. And there was 2 females and 2 males.
Yep.
And if you look at a map and look how well populated Southeast Massachusetts is, all the way
Right.
through the Cape.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
4 of them living in there.
Getting back to the topic, I think on the physical characteristic stuff is something we'd have to do actually a second
Go
show
on, all
because
right.
we barely scratched
Yeah.
the surface. Because we didn't talk about
Right.
knees, we didn't talk about how oftentimes they have the sort of stooped appearance
Yeah.
when they're moving. Nothing. Now, of course, things about their feet have been done to death. Although you still hear people wanting to say, about 3-toed tracks. and
Right.
things like
Or the
that.
track that
3-toed tracks might be
Oh.
just those. That could be a
Right.
deformed.
Well, it could be
set
the
of feet or
surface
something.
that they're
I
walking
don't
on
know.
as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Very
and
true.
the,
Very true.
oh, sorry, I was going to say the tracks that I saw in the snow, there were about 8 feet apart and 1.5 to 2 feet of snow, but there was no drag marks going into the snow or no drag marks coming out. He was popping them in and taking them right out
Yeah.
in making 8-foot strides.
And that's pretty good size when making that.
Yeah.
And again, it's not stride. You're talking about from one foot to the next,
Correct.
correct?
It was going from
And that's something that's
hill
very
to hill
important.
I was measuring. And those were those
From the
18-inch
60s.
tracks, which possibly could be the same group that I've had here in my
18
area.
inch, yeah.
That's a big point.
18 inches is a big one. That's like the big gray one I saw
big boy.
left an 18-inch print.
Yeah.
Just to mention quickly, since the 1960s, people have been using stride and step like they're one and the same, and they're really very different. Actually, what people call stride is step.
Right.
When you measure in a line of tracks, one footprint to the next consecutive track in a line is
Okay.
step. If you're
Correct.
measuring stride, the stride is the arc swing of one
Right.
leg. In other words, if you're going to take, you get a right footprint, the footprint of the right foot, and then you go to the next
Exactly,
right
yep.
foot in line.
Right.
That's stride.
One cycle. Okay.
And a lot of people, they say they throw the terms around. Not that it's a huge thing, but if they're going to throw terms around, at least be accurate. And I think a lot of times when they say, well, stride or something, it kind
Yeah.
of gives
Sure,
people the
sure.
wrong
Okay, yeah.
impression.
So 8-foot steps. Of course. That's what it was.
But that's pretty doggone
Oh,
big.
yeah.
I mean, that's a long
Yeah,
step.
and
Now,
in
whether-
that
whether
snow,
it
I
was-
couldn't believe it.
Whether it was walking
The
or
snow
not.
was about 3 feet deep, and he didn't make it to the bottom, but he went down about 2 foot down in that snow. And his foot was in like a...
I wonder if it was trotting. It sounds a little more than just normal walking.
Well, I think
No,
normally
he ran.
if they were, so you think it was running, and I mean that would be
Like a
Well, I'm thinking about a lot of times when I know about where
Sure.
step and stride were measured. Typically, we talk about Bluff Creek lots of times. Dahinden and Green would talk about. I used to hear these measurements all the time, and typically they were anywhere from 40 to 60 inches.
Mhm.
The step. So if we're talking 8 feet, that's roughly double
I
that.
couldn't
So
believe them.
I'm wondering if there wasn't something
Well,
more.
I do know, and now the mechanics of, the way these things ambulate is obviously unique. But, I know for most of the time, in a tracking sense, the faster an animal moves, especially through snow, is where you're going to start seeing sloppier tracks, and there is going to be some drag. Again,
He
when
was
we
on
look, go ahead.
I was going to say, he was on the ball of his foot, too. His foot was like in the position of a woman's foot in a high heel. The ball of the foot was hitting all the pressure.
Maybe it was.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. I'm more or less, I'm picturing how when a deer, you can always tell when a deer is running because it's going to have drags,
Right.
or it'll kick snow up, in a
Oh,
weird
yeah.
way.
But these guys, when they move, and I think they do it running too, and it's something we don't really know a whole lot about because, again, we don't have that body of correctly recorded and measured information from
swing.
lines of tracks to compare running, to walking,
Sure.
and so on. But they're going to move in the same way. I mean, they move. They pick their feet straight up and down, like kind of like a snowshoe skier. Something along
Yeah,
those
that's
lines,
what it seemed like. Because I could see hair. I could see hair had brushed the track, but
right.
it wasn't like he scooped snow on the way out,
Right. Well, Will, you sent me a picture a while back of there's tracks leading up to a window, and it's in fresh snow, and I looked for any kind of disturbance. And not only was there no disturbance in the snow with staggering, length, but there were no tracks around it. I mean, it was the only thing there. And you look at something like that, and there's nobody going through 3 foot of snow in stilts because you couldn't do it. You know what I mean?
No. And in snow is one of those conditions that'd be virtually impossible to fake.
Yeah.
One of these, especially when you get that long
I
stretch.
was totally amazed. I sat there for 2 or 3 hours. I went around that whole area trying to figure out if he did it. I didn't know. I couldn't figure out how he got 8-foot steps out of there, but I could see where he slowed down when he came to cover. He was running across the cemetery, and he could have been seen. So he took off from one side of the cemetery to the other, and then his tracks were normal in the woods, But across that cemetery, he bolted. He was done.
Yeah.
He must have.
Well, fellas, we're about out of time. We'll have to definitely continue this. Maybe we'll call this part 1, and then we'll do it. We can go again
absolutely.
next week if you guys would like to. Okay, we'll plan for that. So everyone listening, this will be part 1. We'll do part 2 where we can continue on because there's so many things to cover when it talks about the physical characteristics of Sasquatch sightings. And hopefully TW will be able to come back with us. I just got a text from him. He's having trouble with his internet. So everyone, thanks for joining us. Be sure to stay tuned next week for part 2 of this discussion. And everyone, any final thoughts, guys, before I wrap this up?
That was good. It was a good show. I thought we had just tune in next week, and we'll cover the rest of the body.
Absolutely, and fellas, between now and then, think about other particulars, both your own sightings and others that you might want to bring up, and we'll continue this discussion next week.
Okay.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week, and be sure to check out my website, williamjevning.com.